The morning mist hung thick over Windsor Castle as James Morrison adjusted his red ceremonial uniform for what he thought would be another routine day. As one of the Queen's Guard, he had served the royal family for 12 years, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to discover. It started with a simple maintenance request. The palace staff reported a strange, musty odor coming from Queen Camilla's private quarters. The smell had been growing stronger over the past week, and despite the housekeeping team's best efforts, they couldn't locate its source. The head of security decided to conduct a thorough inspection of all rooms, including the Queen Consort's personal wardrobe chamber. James had always been known for his attention to detail. His colleagues often joked that he could spot a speck of dust on a crown from across the room. This particular skill had earned him several commendations and the trust of his superiors. When he was assigned to investigate the mysterious smell, he approached the task with his usual thoroughness. The Queen Consort's wardrobe was a magnificent room, lined with mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of designer gowns, ceremonial robes, and everyday outfits hung in perfect order. Each piece was carefully catalogued and maintained by a team of specialists. The room smelled of expensive perfumes and fine fabrics, but underneath, James detected something else entirely. As he methodically checked each section of the wardrobe, moving aside evening gowns and formal suits, the smell grew stronger near the back wall. The rear of the wardrobe was darker, filled with older garments that were rarely worn. James noticed that some of the wooden panels seemed slightly different from the others. Upon closer inspection, he realized that what appeared to be solid wood was actually a cleverly disguised door. His training kicked in immediately. Any hidden compartments or secret passages in royal residences had to be thoroughly investigated for security purposes. James carefully examined the concealed entrance, looking for any mechanism that might open it. After several minutes of searching, he found a small brass lever hidden behind a fold in one of the hanging gowns. When he pressed the lever, the panel swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a narrow chamber behind the wardrobe. The musty smell immediately became overwhelming, and James had to cover his nose with his handkerchief. The hidden space was small, barely large enough for a person to stand in, and it was completely dark. Using his flashlight, James peered into the secret compartment. What he saw made his heart race and his hands tremble. Hanging alone in the darkness was an ornate robe of incredible beauty and obvious historical significance. The fabric shimmered even in the dim light, and he could see intricate embroidery with gold thread and precious stones. Even without being an expert on royal regalia, James immediately recognized the style and craftsmanship as belonging to coronation garments. The robe was clearly ancient and priceless, but what was it doing hidden in this secret compartment? And why was it concealed in Queen Camilla's private wardrobe? As he studied the garment more closely, James noticed a small embroidered monogram near the collar. His blood ran cold as he made out the letters. The initials were unmistakably those of the late Queen Elizabeth II. This was not just any ceremonial robe. This appeared to be one of the most sacred and important garments in British royal history. James's mind raced with questions and implications. How had this robe come to be hidden here? Who had concealed it and why? The late Queen's personal effects were supposed to have been carefully catalogued and distributed according to her will and royal protocol. A coronation robe of this significance should have been in the Tower of London with the other crown jewels, or in the official royal collection. The discovery was so significant that James knew he had to handle it with extreme care. He couldn't simply report this through normal channels. The implications were too serious and the potential for scandal too great. He needed to document everything precisely and ensure that the proper authorities were notified immediately. With shaking hands, James took out his secure phone and began photographing the hidden chamber and its contents. Each picture was taken from multiple angles, showing the robe's placement, the secret door mechanism, and the surrounding area. He was careful not to disturb anything, knowing that this could become the center of a major investigation. As he worked, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. The elaborate concealment suggested that someone had gone to great lengths to hide this robe from the world. But who would have had access to both the late Queen's coronation garments and Queen Camilla's private quarters? The weight of his discovery pressed down on him as he realized that his routine maintenance check had uncovered what could potentially be one of the biggest royal scandals in modern British history. Whatever the explanation for the hidden robe, James knew that his life as a simple palace guard was about to change forever. James Morrison stood frozen in front of the hidden chamber, his mind racing through the proper protocols for such an extraordinary discovery. In his 12 years of service, he had been trained for many situations. But finding what appeared to be the late Queen's coronation robe hidden in Queen Camilla's wardrobe was definitely not covered in any manual. His first instinct was to immediately contact his commanding officer, Captain William Hayes. However, the magnitude of this discovery made him pause. If word of this got out through the wrong channels, it could create a media firestorm that would rock the monarchy. James decided he needed to gather more information before making any reports. Carefully, he examined the robe more closely without touching it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with thousands of tiny pearls and diamonds sewn into intricate patterns. The fabric appeared to be the finest silk, and despite being hidden in this musty chamber, it was remarkably well preserved. James recognized some of the symbols embroidered into the robe from his studies of royal history. These were definitely coronation-specific designs. As he continued his examination, James noticed something else that made his stomach drop. Tucked behind the robe was a small wooden box ornately carved with the royal coat of arms. The box was partially hidden by the folds of the robe, which explained why he hadn't seen it initially. His curiosity overcame his caution, and he carefully reached in to retrieve it. The box was heavier than expected and locked with an old-fashioned brass mechanism. James could hear something moving inside when he gently shook it. The weight and sound suggested it contained jewelry or other small valuable items. The presence of this box alongside the hidden robe only deepened the mystery and increased the potential significance of his discovery. Just as James was about to examine the box more closely, he heard footsteps in the main wardrobe room. Someone was approaching, and he was trapped in a very compromising position. Quickly, he slipped the box into his uniform jacket and stepped back from the hidden chamber. His heart pounded as he tried to compose himself and think of a reasonable explanation for being in this section of the wardrobe. The footsteps belonged to Margaret Thornfield, Queen Camilla's personal secretary and wardrobe coordinator. She was a stern woman in her 50s who ran the Queen Consort's household with military precision. Margaret was known throughout the palace for her unwavering loyalty to Queen Camilla and her fierce protection of her employer's privacy. "Guard Morrison," Margaret said with surprise in her voice. "What are you doing in Her Majesty's private wardrobe?" "I wasn't informed of any security inspection today." Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. James struggled to maintain his composure while the stolen box seemed to burn against his chest. "Ma'am, we received reports of an unusual odor in this area. I was conducting a routine inspection to identify the source." His voice sounded steadier than he felt, but he could see Margaret's suspicious expression. "An odor?" Margaret stepped closer, her nose wrinkling slightly. "I haven't noticed anything unusual. The cleaning staff maintains this room daily." She moved past James toward the back of the wardrobe, exactly where he had made his discovery. Panic shot through James as he realized Margaret was heading straight for the hidden chamber. If she discovered what he had found, or worse, if she already knew about it, he could be walking into a dangerous situation. He had to think quickly to redirect her attention. "Actually, ma'am, I believe I've located the source," James said, pointing toward a completely different section of the wardrobe. "There seems to be some moisture damage near the eastern wall. Probably a small leak that's causing mold growth." It was a lie, but a believable one given the age of the castle's plumbing. Margaret paused and turned toward where James was pointing. She examined the area carefully, running her hands along the walls and checking behind several gowns. "I don't see any signs of water damage," she said with a frown. "Perhaps you were mistaken about the location." The tension in the room was thick as Margaret continued her inspection. James watched nervously as she moved methodically through the wardrobe, getting closer and closer to the hidden chamber with each step. He needed to get her out of there before she discovered the concealed door. "Ma'am, I should probably file my report and have a maintenance team conduct a more thorough investigation," James suggested. "I don't want to disrupt Her Majesty's belongings any more than necessary." He hoped this would appeal to Margaret's protective instincts. Margaret stopped her examination and looked at James with calculating eyes. "Yes, perhaps that would be best. However, I'll need to be present for any future inspections of this room." Her Majesty's privacy is my responsibility." There was something in her tone that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. As they prepared to leave the wardrobe, Margaret made one more comment that sent chills down James's spine. "Guard Morrison, I trust you understand the importance of discretion when it comes to the royal family's private affairs. Some matters are better left undisturbed." The warning in her voice was unmistakable. James nodded solemnly, all too aware of the weight of the box hidden in his jacket and the earth-shattering secret he had uncovered. As they walked out of the wardrobe together, he couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret's arrival hadn't been coincidental. Had she known about his discovery? Was she involved in whatever conspiracy had led to the robe being hidden? Once he was alone again, James retreated to a secure location where he could examine the box he had taken. His hands shook as he realized he had possibly stolen evidence from a crime scene. But what crime? And who were the criminals? The deeper he delved into this mystery, the more dangerous his situation became. That evening, James Morrison sat in his small apartment outside the castle grounds, staring at the ornate box he had taken from the hidden chamber. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his conscience. He had essentially stolen evidence, but from what? And from whom? The questions multiplied with each passing hour. His apartment was modest but comfortable, a far cry from the opulence of the castle where he worked. James had always preferred simple living, but tonight, the familiar surroundings felt foreign and unsafe. Every sound from the street below made him jump, and he found himself constantly checking the locks on his doors and windows. Finally gathering his courage, James examined the box more carefully. The carving was exquisite, featuring the royal coat of arms surrounded by intricate floral patterns. The brass lock looked old but well-maintained. James had some experience with antique locks from his hobby of restoring vintage furniture, and after several careful attempts, he managed to open it. Inside the box, James found items that made his discovery even more shocking. There were several pieces of jewelry that clearly belonged to coronation regalia, a small diamond tiara, matching earrings, and a brooch that he recognized from historical photographs of royal ceremonies. But most disturbing of all was a handwritten letter bearing the late Queen's official seal. With trembling hands, James unfolded the letter. It was written in the Queen's distinctive handwriting, something he recognized from various official documents he had seen during his service. The letter was dated just 3 months before the Queen's death and was addressed to someone called "My Trusted Friend." The contents of the letter made James's blood run cold. The letter spoke of concerns about certain items from the royal collection going missing after the Queen's death. It mentioned specific pieces, including a coronation robe that held special significance to the Queen's mother. The letter expressed worry about these items falling into the wrong hands and requested that trusted friend help ensure their safety by temporarily hiding them until proper arrangements could be made. What shocked James most was the letter's conclusion, which suggested that the Queen suspected someone within the royal household might attempt to claim or sell these precious items illegally. The letter ended with detailed instructions about where these items should be hidden, instructions that perfectly matched the secret compartment James had discovered in Queen Camilla's wardrobe. As James read and reread the letter, the implications became clear. The late Queen had apparently arranged for these precious items to be hidden for their protection. But if that was true, why hadn't they been recovered after her death? Who was this trusted friend, and what had happened to prevent them from following through with the Queen's wishes? A terrible thought began to form in James's mind. What if Queen Camilla was the trusted friend mentioned in the letter? What if she had been asked to hide these items temporarily, but had decided to keep them instead? The timing would make sense. The letter was written shortly before the Queen's death, and Queen Camilla would have had access to both the items and the wardrobe. But James couldn't bring himself to believe that Queen Camilla would steal from the late Queen. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps she had hidden the items as requested, but then forgotten about them in the chaos following the Queen's death. Or maybe she was waiting for the right time to reveal them. James desperately wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. His phone buzzed with a text message making him jump. It was from his colleague Sarah Chen, another member of the Queen's Guard. "Heard you had an interesting day in the Queen Consort's quarters. Everything okay?" The message seemed innocent enough, but it worried James. News traveled fast in the palace, and if people were already talking about his activities, it might not be long before the wrong people took notice. James decided he needed help, but he had to be extremely careful about whom to trust. His commanding officer, Captain Hayes, was an obvious choice, but James worried about the chain of command. If there was corruption or conspiracy at high levels, reporting through official channels might put him in danger or allow evidence to be destroyed. Instead, James thought about his old friend Detective Inspector Robert Sterling from Scotland Yard. They had served together in the military before James joined the Queen's Guard, and Robert became a police detective. Robert specialized in art theft and fraud cases, which seemed relevant to the current situation. More importantly, James trusted him completely. However, contacting Robert would mean involving outside law enforcement in royal affairs, something that was strictly forbidden without proper authorization. James would be risking his career and possibly facing criminal charges for revealing confidential information about the royal family. But he was beginning to realize that his career might already be in jeopardy. As James weighed his options, he noticed a car parked outside his building that hadn't been there earlier. The windows were tinted and he couldn't see inside, but something about it made him uneasy. He watched for several minutes, but no one got out of the car and it didn't move. Paranoia began to creep in as James wondered if he was being watched. Making a decision that would change everything, James carefully photographed the letter and all the jewelry in the box. He uploaded the images to a secure cloud storage account and sent the access information to Detective Inspector Sterling with a brief message. "Rob, I need your help with something extremely sensitive. Please look at these images and call me on a secure line. Trust no one else with this information." After sending the message, James carefully repacked the box and hid it in a location where no one would think to look. He knew he was crossing a line that he could never uncross, but the magnitude of what he had discovered left him no choice. The late Queen's final wishes were being ignored, and precious historical artifacts were being kept hidden for unknown reasons. As James prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. Whether Queen Camilla was innocent or guilty, whether this was a misunderstanding or a crime, one thing was certain: the truth would eventually come out, and James Morrison would be at the center of the storm that followed. The next morning arrived with an early phone call that jolted James from his restless sleep. Detective Inspector Robert Sterling's voice was tense and urgent. "James, we need to meet immediately. What you've sent me is explosive. Don't discuss this with anyone else and make sure you're not being followed when you come to meet me." James agreed to meet Robert at a small cafe in central London, far from the palace and away from anyone who might recognize him. As he prepared to leave his apartment, James noticed the mysterious car from the previous evening was gone. He wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one. During the train journey to London, James couldn't help but notice a man in a dark coat who seemed to be following him. The man got on the same train car, moved when James moved, and kept glancing in his direction. James's military training kicked in, and he used several techniques to confirm he was being tailed. The realization that someone was actually following him made his blood run cold. Using a series of quick moves through the busy London underground, James managed to lose his pursuer and arrived at the cafe 15 minutes late. Robert Sterling was already there, looking as serious as James had ever seen him. Robert was a tall, thin man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His expression told James immediately that the situation was even worse than he had imagined. "James, do you have any idea what you've stumbled into?" Robert asked quietly as soon as James sat down. "The items in those photographs are worth millions of pounds, but more importantly, they're historically priceless. If what you found is authentic, and I believe it is, then someone has been hiding some of the most important pieces of British royal heritage." Robert explained that he had spent the entire night researching the items in James's photographs. The Coronation Robe matched descriptions of a garment that had been worn by Queen Elizabeth's mother during her coronation ceremony. It had been missing from official inventories for several years, but palace officials had claimed it was undergoing restoration and was being stored in a secure location. "The problem," Robert continued, "is that according to my contacts in the art world, this robe was supposedly destroyed in a fire at a restoration facility 2 years ago. Insurance was collected on it, but if it's hidden in Queen Camilla's wardrobe, then someone has been lying on a massive scale." James felt sick as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about hidden treasures. It was about insurance fraud, theft of national heritage, and deception at the highest levels of the royal household. The amount of money involved, combined with the historical significance of the items, made this a crime of unprecedented magnitude. Robert leaned forward and lowered his voice even further. "James, there's something else you need to know. I made some discreet inquiries this morning, and it seems that several other pieces from the royal collection have also been reported as destroyed or lost over the past few years. In each case, substantial insurance payouts were made. I think you may have uncovered evidence of a systematic theft operation." The detective explained that this type of crime was more common than people realized. Valuable items would be reported as destroyed or stolen. Insurance money would be collected, and then the items would be hidden until enough time had passed for them to be safely sold on the black market. The fact that these particular items were hidden in a royal residence suggested that someone with high-level access was involved. "We need to get back into that hidden chamber," Robert said. "I need to see everything with my own eyes and gather proper evidence. But this has to be done carefully. If we alert the wrong people, evidence could disappear, and we could both end up in serious danger." James explained about his encounter with Margaret Thornfield and his suspicion that she might know more than she was letting on. Robert nodded grimly, making notes in a small notebook. The detective's experience in major fraud cases was evident as he asked detailed questions about palace security, staff access, and the timeline of events. "There's one more thing," James said reluctantly. "I think I was followed this morning. Someone is already suspicious of my activities." He described the man in the dark coat and his evasive maneuvers in the underground. Robert's expression grew even more serious. "That confirms my worst fears. If they're already watching you, then they know you've discovered something important. We need to move quickly, but we also need to be extremely careful about your safety." The detective outlined a plan that would allow them to gather the evidence they needed while minimizing the risk to James. They would return to the palace during the evening shift, change when security was focused on other areas. Robert would pose as a maintenance contractor that James was escorting, giving them cover to access Queen Camilla's wardrobe. "But first," Robert said, "we need to secure the evidence you've already collected. That box and its contents are crucial to proving this case. I'm going to arrange for them to be held in a secure location where they can't be tampered with or stolen." As they prepared to leave the cafe, Robert gave James a small device that looked like a pen. "This is a recording device and GPS tracker," he explained. "Keep it with you at all times. If something happens to you, we'll be able to find you and have evidence of what occurred." James pocketed the device, feeling both reassured and terrified by its necessity. The fact that an experienced detective thought he might need protection highlighted just how dangerous his situation had become. What had started as a routine maintenance check had evolved into a major criminal investigation that could bring down powerful people within the royal household. Walking back through London's busy streets, James couldn't shake the feeling that his world had been turned upside down. He had always seen his role as a protector of the royal family, but now he found himself investigating what appeared to be crimes committed by people he had sworn to serve. The conflict between his duty as a guard and his responsibility as a citizen weighed heavily on his mind. As evening approached, James prepared for what could be the most important and dangerous night of his life. The truth about the hidden treasures was finally within reach, but so were the people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. That evening, James returned to Windsor Castle with Detective Inspector Robert Sterling, who was disguised as a heating and ventilation contractor. Robert carried authentic-looking equipment and wore coveralls that made him blend in perfectly with the palace maintenance staff. James's hands were sweaty as they approached the security checkpoint, but his years of experience helped him maintain a calm exterior. The plan was simple but risky. During the evening shift change, there would be a 20-minute window when the corridors near Queen Camilla's quarters would have minimal security coverage. James would escort Robert to the wardrobe under the pretense of investigating the mysterious odor he had reported earlier. They would have just enough time to document the hidden chamber and its contents before the new security shift took their positions. As they walked through the castle's ornate corridors, James couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. These walls had witnessed centuries of royal secrets, but none quite like this. The weight of history seemed to press down on him as they moved closer to their destination, and he wondered if future generations would read about this night in history books. When they reached Queen Camilla's quarters, James used his security clearance to access the wardrobe. The room was exactly as he had left it, but somehow it felt different now that he knew what lay hidden within its walls. Robert immediately went to work, using professional equipment to photograph and measure everything in the room before they approached the secret chamber. "This is incredible craftsmanship," Robert whispered as James showed him the hidden door mechanism. This compartment was built to be completely invisible. Someone spent serious money to create this hiding place. The detective's experienced eye could tell that this wasn't a recent addition. The secret chamber had been built into the wardrobe's original design. When James opened the hidden door, Robert's reaction was immediate and intense. Even though he had seen the photographs, witnessing the coronation robe in person clearly affected him. "My God, James, this is one of the most historically significant garments in British history. The craftsmanship, the materials, the symbolism, this belongs in a museum, not hidden in a secret compartment." Robert carefully documented everything, taking hundreds of photographs from every possible angle. He used special equipment to measure the chamber and analyze the preservation conditions. Ironically, he noted, whoever hid this robe actually did an excellent job of preserving it. The controlled environment has kept it in remarkable condition. As Robert worked, James kept watch and tried to process the magnitude of what they were uncovering. The detective had brought equipment to test for fingerprints, DNA evidence, and other forensic clues that might help identify who had been handling these items. Every piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. "James, look at this," Robert called softly. He had discovered something else hidden behind the robe, a small leather journal wrapped in protective cloth. This wasn't visible in your original photographs because it was completely concealed by the robe's folds. The journal appeared to be old and had been well used. Robert carefully opened it, revealing page after page of handwritten entries in what appeared to be a woman's handwriting. The entries were dated, starting from several years earlier and continuing up until just a few months ago. As they read the first few entries, the truth began to emerge. The journal belonged to Margaret Thornfield, Queen Camilla's personal secretary. The entries detailed a systematic plan to hide valuable items from the royal collection before they could be properly catalogued after the late Queen's death. Margaret wrote about her concerns that certain items might be redistributed to other royal family members or even sold off to reduce the monarchy's expenses. "Listen to this entry," Robert whispered, reading from the journal. "The Queen trusted me to protect these treasures. She knew that after her death there would be pressure to liquidate parts of the collection. She asked me to hide the most precious items until the situation stabilized. I couldn't let her down even if it means breaking the law." The journal revealed that Margaret had been acting on what she believed were the late Queen's wishes, but she had misunderstood the Queen's letter. The late Queen had wanted the items temporarily hidden and then properly secured, not kept hidden indefinitely. Margaret's good intentions had led her to commit serious crimes, including insurance fraud when she reported the items as destroyed. "But there's more," Robert continued reading. "Margaret wasn't acting alone. Look at this entry from 6 months ago." The journal revealed that Margaret had been pressured by someone else to keep the items hidden longer than originally planned. Someone was using Margaret's loyalty to the late Queen to manipulate her into maintaining the fraud. As they continued reading, a chilling picture emerged. Margaret had become increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but felt trapped by her initial decisions. The journal entries showed her growing paranoia and fear that she would be discovered. Most disturbing of all, the final entry suggested that she suspected James had found the hidden chamber and was planning to take action to protect herself. "James, we need to leave now," Robert said urgently as he finished photographing the journal. "According to these entries, Margaret knows you found this place. She's been watching you and she's getting desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things." Just as Robert finished speaking, they heard footsteps in the main wardrobe room. Someone was approaching, and they were trapped in the hidden chamber with nowhere to run. James quickly closed the secret door, but they both knew that if Margaret had come to check on the chamber, their hiding place would be discovered within seconds. The footsteps moved methodically through the wardrobe, getting closer to their location. James could hear someone moving hangers and searching through the clothes, clearly looking for something specific. His heart pounded as he realized that Margaret might not be alone. The footsteps sounded heavier than those of a single person. Through the thin wall of the hidden chamber, they could hear voices speaking in low, urgent tones. James recognized Margaret's voice immediately, but there was someone else with her. A man with a deep voice that James didn't recognize. Their conversation was muffled, but he could make out enough words to understand that they were discussing the security breach and what to do about the guard who knows too much. Robert gripped James's arm and pointed to his watch. They had been in the chamber for longer than planned, and the new security shift would be starting their round soon. If they didn't leave now, they would be trapped until the next shift change hours later. But with Margaret and her accomplice in the wardrobe, leaving seemed impossible without being discovered. The situation had gone from dangerous to potentially deadly. James and Robert were trapped with evidence of a major crime, facing people who clearly saw them as a threat to be eliminated. The next few minutes would determine whether their investigation would expose the truth or whether they would become the latest victims of a conspiracy that reached higher into the royal household than they had ever imagined. Inside the cramped hidden chamber, James and Robert held their breath as the voices outside grew clearer. Margaret was speaking to someone with authority, someone who was clearly giving her orders rather than suggestions. The man's voice was cultured and commanding, suggesting he held a high position within the royal household. "The guard has become a liability," the man was saying. "His investigation has gone too far, and he's involved outside authorities. We need to contain this situation before it spirals completely out of control." James felt his blood turn to ice as he realized they were planning something terrible. Margaret's voice was shaky and nervous. "Sir David, I never intended for things to go this far. I was only trying to protect the Queen's treasures as she asked. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." The name Sir David made James's heart sink. Sir David Pemberton was the deputy master of the royal household, one of the most senior officials in the entire palace organization. "Your intentions are irrelevant now," Sir David replied coldly. "What matters is protecting the institution. The insurance money from those destroyed artifacts has funded several important palace renovations and security upgrades. If this fraud is exposed, it will create a scandal that could damage the monarchy for generations." Through the thin wall, James could hear them moving closer to the hidden chamber. Robert had his phone ready to record everything, but James worried that any sound might give away their position. The detective's experience in dangerous situations was evident as he remained perfectly still, while capturing crucial evidence. "The guard and his detective friend are probably planning to return," Sir David continued. "We need to remove the evidence and relocate it somewhere safer. Then we'll deal with Morrison permanently. His death will need to look accidental, perhaps a tragic fall during his security rounds." James's training as a royal guard had prepared him for many threats, but hearing a senior palace official casually discussing his murder was something he had never imagined. The corruption went far higher than they had suspected, involving people with the power and resources to make him disappear without a trace. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir David, surely we don't need to hurt anyone. Couldn't we just transfer Morrison to a different position? Move him somewhere far from the palace?" Her suggestion showed she still had some conscience left, but James knew Sir David wouldn't be swayed by moral arguments. "My dear Margaret, you've watched too many fairy tales," Sir David replied with a bitter laugh. "This is the real world where institutional survival trumps individual lives. Morrison has already involved Scotland Yard. Do you think Detective Sterling will simply forget what he's learned? They both know too much to be allowed to live." As James listened to this chilling conversation, he realized the true scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about a few hidden artifacts. It was about a systematic looting of the royal collection that had been used to fund off-the-books palace expenses. Sir David had been using Margaret's loyalty to the late Queen as cover for what was essentially an elaborate embezzlement scheme. Robert managed to catch James's attention and pointed toward his watch. The new security shift would be starting their rounds in less than 5 minutes. If they were discovered in the hidden chamber, they would be trapped with no witnesses and no chance of escape. They needed to act quickly or risk becoming victims of the very conspiracy they were trying to expose. "Start removing the items," Sir David ordered Margaret. "I'll call my contacts to arrange for Morrison's accident. It needs to happen tonight, before he can report anything else to his detective friend." James heard the sound of the secret door mechanism being activated. Light flooded into the chamber as Margaret opened the hidden door, revealing James and Robert crouched inside with the evidence they had been gathering. For a moment, everyone froze in shocked silence. Margaret's face went completely white, while Sir David's expression quickly changed from surprise to cold calculation. "Well, well," Sir David said with deadly calm. "It seems our problems have solved themselves. Mr. Morrison and Detective Sterling have saved us the trouble of hunting them down." James could see the man clearly now. Sir David was in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to wielding power without question. Robert immediately stood up and identified himself as a police officer, but Sir David just smiled coldly. "Detective Sterling, you're a long way from your jurisdiction and deep inside a royal residence without proper authorization. I'm afraid you're trespassing on crown property, which makes you subject to palace security protocols." James realized that Sir David was preparing to have them arrested, or worse, under the pretense of protecting royal security. The man had spent decades working within the system and knew exactly how to manipulate palace protocols to cover his crimes. They were trapped in a place where Sir David's word would be trusted over theirs. "Margaret, call security and report intruders in the Queen Consort's private quarters," Sir David ordered. "Tell them we've caught 2 men attempting to steal from the royal collection. The evidence they're carrying will support our story perfectly." His plan was diabolical. He would frame them for the very crimes he had committed. But Margaret hesitated, looking between Sir David and the 2 men trapped in the chamber. James could see the internal struggle on her face as she weighed her loyalty to Sir David against her growing realization of what she had become involved in. The woman who had started out trying to protect the late Queen's treasures was finally understanding that she had been manipulated into becoming an accomplice to serious crimes. "Margaret, make the call now," Sir David demanded, his voice taking on a threatening edge, "or you'll find yourself sharing their fate. I've protected you this far, but my patience has limits." The threat was clear. Margaret would either cooperate completely or become another victim. James knew this was their last chance. In seconds, Margaret would either call for help that would save them or summon security that would seal their doom. Everything depended on whether the woman's conscience could overcome her fear and years of manipulation. The next few moments would determine whether the truth about the royal treasures would ever see the light of day. Margaret Thornfield stood frozen with her phone in her hand, torn between decades of conditioning to follow orders and the growing horror of what she had become part of. James could see tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the hidden chamber that had become both her secret shame and her prison. "I can't do this anymore," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "Sir David, what we've done is wrong. The Queen never wanted us to steal from the crown. She wanted us to protect these treasures, not use them for fraud." Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. Sir David's face contorted with rage at Margaret's defiance. "You foolish woman. Do you think your conscience matters now? You're already an accomplice to insurance fraud worth millions of pounds. The only choice you have is whether to save yourself or join these 2 in an unfortunate accident." But Margaret's breakdown had given James the opportunity he needed. During his years as a royal guard, he had never forgotten his military training. In one swift movement, he lunged forward and tackled Sir David, sending the older man sprawling across the wardrobe floor. Robert immediately moved to restrain Sir David while James secured his weapon. "It's over. Sir David," Robert announced, showing his detective's badge and the recording device that had captured everything. "I've been transmitting this entire conversation to Scotland Yard. Officers are already on their way to the palace." The relief in his voice was evident as backup units confirmed their position through his earpiece. Sir David's composure finally cracked as he realized his decades-long scheme was collapsing around him. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "The money from those insurance claims funded critical security improvements that Parliament refused to approve. I was protecting the monarchy from terrorist threats and budget cuts." James felt sick as he understood Sir David's twisted justification. The man genuinely believed that stealing national treasures was acceptable if it served what he saw as the greater good. His corruption had been wrapped in patriotism and duty, making it even more dangerous because he would never admit he was wrong. Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing as the weight of her actions finally hit her. "I thought I was honoring the Queen's memory," she cried.
She trusted me to protect those treasures, and I let that man turn me into a criminal.
I never wanted any of this to happen. Within minutes, the wardrobe was filled with Scotland Yard detectives and palace security officers. The hidden chamber that had concealed secrets for years was now blazing with camera flashes as forensic experts documented every piece of evidence. James watched in amazement as investigators carefully removed the coronation robe and other priceless artifacts that would finally be returned to their rightful place in the royal collection. Detective Chief Inspector Amanda Walsh took charge of the scene with the efficiency that had made her one of Scotland Yard's most respected officers. She immediately separated the suspects and witnesses to prevent any coordination of stories. James found himself giving statement after statement, recounting every detail of his discovery and investigation. Guard Morrison, your actions have uncovered one of the largest fraud cases in royal history, DCI Walsh told him during a break in the interviews. The insurance money Sir David stole could have funded legitimate palace needs, but instead it went into unauthorized accounts that he controlled. We're still calculating the full extent of the theft. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, the investigation was expanding rapidly. Search warrants were being executed at Sir David's properties, and financial experts were tracing the stolen insurance money through various accounts and investments. The scope of the corruption was staggering, involving forged documents, bribed officials, and a network of accomplices who had helped hide the truth for years. Margaret Thornfield was charged as an accessory, but received consideration for her cooperation and her genuine remorse. Her testimony revealed that Sir David had manipulated her grief over the late Queen's death and her desire to honor her memory. The judge would later note that while her actions were criminal, she had been psychologically manipulated by someone who exploited her loyalty and trust. Sir David Pemberton faced dozens of charges including fraud, theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. His trial became a sensation that dominated headlines for months. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including his recorded confessions and the financial records that showed exactly how he had looted the royal collection for personal and unauthorized purposes. James Morrison became a reluctant hero whose dedication to duty had exposed corruption at the highest levels of the royal household. He was commended by both Scotland Yard and the royal family for his integrity and courage. However, he chose to leave his position as a royal guard, feeling that the experience had changed his relationship with the institution he had served so loyally. The coronation robe and other recovered artifacts were restored to the official royal collection, where they were put on public display for the first time in decades. The exhibit became one of the most popular tourist attractions in London, with visitors coming from around the world to see the treasures that had nearly been lost forever. Detective Inspector Robert Sterling led the task force that investigated similar thefts from other cultural institutions across Britain. Their work revealed that Sir David's scheme was part of a larger pattern of corruption that had affected museums, historic houses, and private collections throughout the country. The case led to major reforms in how valuable cultural artifacts are tracked and protected. Years later, James often reflected on how a simple maintenance check had led to the exposure of such massive corruption. He had learned that duty sometimes requires questioning the very institutions you serve, and that true loyalty means protecting what those institutions are supposed to represent, rather than the people who temporarily control them. The hidden chamber in Queen Camilla's wardrobe was sealed and converted into a small museum display, serving as a reminder that even in the most prestigious institutions, vigilance is required to protect the treasures that belong to all of humanity. The late Queen's coronation robe, once hidden in darkness, now shines under museum lights as a symbol of how truth will eventually emerge, no matter how carefully it has been concealed.